His name was Alistair Finch, and he lived in the sky. Not literally, of course, but his penthouse apartment on the 80th floor of the city's most exclusive tower might as well have been another stratosphere. From his floor-to-ceiling windows, the world below was a beautiful silent map. The cars were metallic insects, the people insignificant specks, their lives, their struggles, their noise completely muted by the triple-paned glass and the sheer altitude. This was how Alistair liked it. He had spent his entire life climbing, clawing his way up from a modest background to become a titan of finance, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear. He had built an empire of numbers on a screen, of assets and acquisitions, but in the process he had built walls around his heart that were far thicker than the ones surrounding his sky-high fortress. His world was one of transactions. Every person had a value. Every action had a price. His driver, his personal chef, his assistants, they were all paid handsomely to be loyal, to be efficient, to be invisible. He didn't know their children's names or their dreams. He only knew they served a purpose, and when that purpose was fulfilled, the transaction was complete. He often thought that kindness was a currency for the poor, a way to barter for things they couldn't afford. He, on the other hand, could afford anything. His mornings were a ritual of control. An espresso brewed from beans that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. A suit tailored so perfectly it felt like a second skin of power. A quick, dismissive glance at the headlines on his tablet, scanning for his own company's stock price, the only news that truly mattered. Today was no different. He stood by the window, sipping his coffee, a faint, smug smile on his face as he watched a storm roll in over the distant hills. He felt nothing for the people down below who would be caught in the rain without an umbrella. He had his own climate-controlled world. He was safe. He was untouchable. His empire was perfect, sterile, and entirely his own. But an empire of one is not a kingdom. It's a prison. And the loneliest place in the world isn't at the bottom, it's at the very top, when you've forgotten that the specks below are human hearts, each beating with a life as vivid and important as your own. Alistair Finch, the man who had everything, was about to learn that in the face of true disaster, wealth is just paper, and a penthouse is just a cage. His world was perfectly ordered, completely under his control, but he was about to learn that chaos doesn't bother to knock on the door. Miles below Alistair's penthouse, in the rain-slicked arteries of the city that the millionaire never saw, lived a boy named Leo. Leo's world wasn't made of glass and steel, but of cracked pavement, brick walls covered in graffiti, and the constant rhythmic symphony of survival. At 12 years old, he had seen more of life's sharp edges than Alistair had in his 60 years. He didn't have a portfolio. He had a worn-out backpack. He didn't have assets. He had a quick mind and an even quicker smile. Leo was an orphan, living in a cramped but clean group home, run by a tired but kind woman named Mrs. Gable. She did her best, but there were 12 kids and never enough resources to go around. So Leo learned to be resourceful. He learned to be observant. He knew the city's secret pathways, the delivery routes, the service tunnels that were the building's hidden veins. While other kids were playing video games, Leo was exploring, learning the map of his world not from a screen, but with his own 2 feet. He saw the city not as a ladder to be climbed, but as a complex ecosystem where everything was connected. He saw the baker who left out day-old bread for the hungry, the street musician who played for smiles, not just coins, and the stray cats he would share his meager leftovers with. He didn't see people as transactions. He saw their stories. He saw the weariness in the eyes of a construction worker and the hope in the face of a street vendor. This wasn't a conscious philosophy. It was just how he saw the world. It was a perspective born not of innocence, but of experience. He knew what it felt like to be hungry, to be cold, to be invisible. And because he knew, he made it a point to see others. He would help an elderly woman carry her groceries up the stairs. He would give his only snack to a younger child at the home who was crying. These were not grand gestures. They were small, quiet acts of humanity, ripples in a pond that no one important ever seemed to notice. Leo had no illusions about life. He knew it was hard. He knew it was unfair. But unlike Alistair, who had armored himself against the world with wealth, Leo had shielded himself with something far more resilient: empathy. He understood that being poor didn't mean you had nothing. It just meant that what you had to give wasn't money. He was a boy who had nothing, living in the shadow of a man who had everything. Yet in the moments to come, their roles would be devastatingly reversed. The fire didn't start with a dramatic explosion. It started with a whisper, a faulty wire in a utility closet on the 75th floor, a spark, a slow, hungry flicker that found a box of cleaning supplies and began to feast. For the first 20 minutes, no one knew. The building's advanced fire suppression system, a $1 million installation Alistair had personally boasted about in a magazine interview, failed. A critical sensor had been flagged for maintenance weeks ago, but the memo was lost in a sea of bureaucratic paperwork, deemed less urgent than profit margins. By the time the first alarm blared, it was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. A monster of thick black smoke had awakened inside the walls of the great tower, and it was climbing. Alistair was in his office, barking orders over the phone at a broker in Tokyo. He heard the alarm and did what he always did. He sighed with annoyance. A drill. An inconvenience designed to disrupt his meticulously scheduled day. He buzzed his assistant. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. It was then that he smelled it. A faint, acrid scent that was alien to his purified, filtered air. He opened his office door, and his world of sterile control vanished. The hallway was a churning vortex of grey smoke. The lights flickered, casting strobe-like, terrifying shadows on the walls. Panic, an emotion he hadn't felt in decades, seized him. It was a cold, primal fear that his money could not negotiate with. He slammed the door shut, his heart hammering against his ribs. He ran to the windows, looking down at the city. The beautiful map was now a terrifyingly distant sanctuary. He was trapped. He grabbed his phone, but the lines were dead. The electricity sputtered and died, plunging his penthouse into an eerie, smoke-filled twilight. The roar of the fire was louder now, a physical presence, the sound of his perfect world being devoured. He, Alistair Finch, the master of the universe, was just a man in a burning box. He stumbled through the smoke, coughing, his eyes streaming. He made it to the emergency exit, the one that led to the private stairwell. He pulled the handle. It was locked. The electronic security system, designed to keep intruders out, had now sealed him in. The irony was a bitter pill. His fortress had become his tomb. He slumped against the door, gasping for air, the smoke stealing his breath, his strength, his hope. This was it. This was the end. His entire life, his billions, his empire, all of it would burn with him. In his final, terrifying moments, he didn't think of his money. He thought of the people he had wronged, the hands he had never shaken, the thank yous he had never said. He was going to die alone, on top of the world. He had spent a lifetime building his ivory tower, but it took less than an hour for it to become his coffin. This is how death comes, Alistair thought, not as a figure in a black robe, but as a suffocating cloud of your own burning regrets. He was on the floor now, his bespoke suit covered in soot, his lungs on fire. The heat was immense, pressing in from all sides. The roar was deafening. He had given up. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the inevitable. Then, through the chaos, he heard a sound that didn't belong. A metallic scrape, a grunt of effort. His eyes fluttered open. A figure was standing in the doorway of the service entrance, a small, grimy door he hadn't even realized was there. It was a silhouette, haloed by the terrifying orange glow from the hallway beyond. It wasn't a firefighter. It was too small, too slight. It was a boy. Leo had been in the building's sub-basement, collecting discarded cardboard from the loading dock to sell. When the alarms went off, he didn't panic. He listened. He observed. While everyone else stampeded towards the main exits, Leo remembered the service stairwells, the ones the maintenance crews used. They were old, made of concrete and steel, and rarely used. They were his secret pathways. He had started to make his way down when he heard it, a desperate, choked cry from far above. Something told him to go up. It was illogical, it was insane, but it was a voice he couldn't ignore. Now, standing in the doorway of the billionaire's penthouse, he saw a man curled on the floor, ready to die. Leo didn't see a titan of industry. He saw a person who was scared. He walked forward, his own heart pounding, and crouched down. "Sir," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos, "we have to go." Now, Alistair stared, bewildered. Was he hallucinating? An angel in the smoke? Leo pulled a damp cloth from his pocket, one he used for cleaning his hands, and held it out. "Breathe through this," he commanded, not with authority, but with simple, direct clarity. "Stay low. The air is better down here." Alistair was too weak to argue. He could only obey. He took the cloth, his trembling hand brushing against the boy's. The boy's hand was calloused and small, but it was the strongest thing Alistair had felt in his entire life. Leo didn't try to lift him. He knew he couldn't. Instead, he guided him. "Crawl. Follow me. Don't look back." And Alistair did. The great Alistair Finch, who had never followed anyone, crawled on his hands and knees across the marble floor of his dying palace, following a child he had never met, a boy who was calmly leading him away from the gates of hell. In the heart of the fire that melted gold and steel, the most valuable thing in the world turned out to be the courage of a boy who had nothing to lose and nothing to gain. The journey down was a nightmare. The service stairwell was dark, filled with smoke, and echoed with the terrifying groans of the dying building. But Leo was a steady presence. He seemed to know every turn, every landing. He didn't speak much, just offered simple instructions. "Careful here. Stairs are broken." Almost there. For Alistair, the world had shrunk to this single point of focus, the small shadowy figure of the boy in front of him. He wasn't a millionaire anymore. He was a survivor, and his survival depended entirely on this child. Every instinct that had made him a ruthless businessman, pride, ego, control, was burned away, leaving only the raw, desperate will to live. He clung to the boy's guidance like a lifeline. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled out of a service door into the chaos of the ground floor lobby. Firefighters and paramedics swarmed the area. The air was fresh and cool, and it felt like the most luxurious thing Alistair had ever experienced. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping, his body shaking uncontrollably. A team of paramedics immediately rushed to his side, strapping an oxygen mask to his face, checking his vitals, shouting questions he couldn't comprehend. His mind was a fog of smoke and disbelief. Through the haze, he looked for the boy. He saw him standing a few feet away, watching, his face smudged with soot, his expression unreadable. Alistair pulled at the oxygen mask, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. "The boy," he rasped, pointing a shaky finger. He saved me." A paramedic glanced over, saw a dirty kid who looked out of place, and turned his attention back to his wealthy patient. "Sir, we need to get you to the hospital." "Just relax." Alistair tried to sit up, a sudden, desperate urgency flooding him. "Wait," he croaked. "Him. I need to—" He had to thank him. He had to give him something. A reward, money, anything. His mind was already reverting to its default setting, transaction. This boy had performed the ultimate service. He must be compensated. He fumbled for his wallet, which was gone, likely melted away upstairs. It didn't matter. He would write a check. He would give him a fortune. He owed him his life. He finally got the mask off his face and looked back to where the boy had been standing. He was gone. Alistair scanned the chaotic crowd. He saw uniforms, panicked faces, crying residents. But the boy, his savior, had vanished. He had slipped back into the city, as silent and anonymous as he had appeared. He hadn't asked for a thank you. He hadn't waited for a reward. He had simply disappeared. Alistair Finch had been saved, but he was left with a debt he couldn't repay, to a ghost he couldn't find. In the sterile white room of the city's best private hospital, Alistair Finch was physically safe. The doctors said he was lucky, smoke inhalation, minor burns. But he would make a full recovery. They treated him with deference, calling him Mr. Finch, their voices hushed with respect for his status. But as his body healed, his mind began to unravel. The silence of the room was louder than the fire. In that silence, the image of the boy played on a loop in his mind. The calm voice, the steady hand, the complete and total lack of self-interest. It was a concept so alien to Alistair's world that he couldn't process it. For 40 years, his life had been a series of calculated exchanges. You give me this, I give you that. He had built his empire on the belief that everyone, at their core, was selfish. Altruism was a myth, a pretty lie people told themselves. Yet that boy had walked into the heart of an inferno for a complete stranger. He had risked his own life for nothing, and then he had walked away. Why? The question haunted Alistair, burrowing deeper than any physical injury. It forced him to look at his own life, and what he saw horrified him. He saw a man surrounded by employees, but with no friends. A man with a dozen properties, but no home. A man whose phone was filled with powerful contacts, but with no one to call in the middle of the night just to talk. He had spent his life acquiring things, only to realize in a cloud of smoke that none of it mattered. His private security had failed him. His wealth couldn't buy him a breath of clean air. His power was meaningless against a single spark. He was saved not by his empire, but by a poor child who owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a core of human decency that Alistair had long ago traded for profit. A profound and painful shame washed over him. The doctors saw a patient recovering, but Alistair felt like a man who had just been truly broken. The fire hadn't destroyed him, it had exposed him, and in the ashes of his pride, a new, desperate need was born. It wasn't about money or business, it was a hunger to understand. He had to find that boy, not just to reward him, but to ask him that one haunting question, why? The fire was out, but a new one was burning inside Alistair, a desperate, obsessive need to find the one person who had shown him how poor he truly was. The moment he was discharged, Alistair Finch did the only thing he knew how to do. He threw money at the problem. He hired the best private investigation firm in the country. He launched a city-wide media campaign. His face, haggard and earnest, was plastered on television screens, on websites, on the sides of buses. "Help me find my hero," the headlines screamed. A reward was announced, $100,000, then $500,000. Then, in a moment of sheer desperation, he announced a $1 million reward for any information leading to the identity of the boy who saved him. No questions asked. The city went into a frenzy. Alistair's office was flooded with calls. Thousands of people claimed to be the boy or to know the boy. The investigators waded through a deluge of fraud and false hope. They interviewed dozens of hopeful parents, pushing their sons forward, coaching them on what to say. Each time, Alistair would meet them, his heart leaping with anticipation only to have it crash. None of them were him. They didn't have the same eyes, old wise eyes in a young face. They didn't have the same quiet calm. They all wanted the money. His boy, his savior, wanted nothing. The search became a grueling, soul-crushing process. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. The investigators used facial recognition software on security footage from the area, but the cameras were old, the angles poor, the images a blur of smoke and panic. They had nothing. The boy, it seemed, lived in the city's blind spots. He had no digital footprint. He was a ghost in the machine. During this time, Alistair changed. He stopped yelling at his staff. He started asking their names. He would walk the city streets for hours, something he had never done before, looking at the faces of strangers, searching for a familiar pair of eyes. He saw the city for the first time, not from his penthouse window, but from the ground level. He saw the struggle, the grit, the quiet dignity of ordinary people. He was a man humbled, haunted, and utterly obsessed. His $1 million reward had failed. His power was useless. The search was teaching him the lesson the fire had begun. The most valuable things in life cannot be bought. The entire city was looking for the boy, but they were all looking for the wrong reasons, and you can't find a soul when you're only searching for a name. 3 months after the fire, the investigation was cold. The media had moved on to other stories. Alistair's team was ready to give up. "Mr. Finch," his lead investigator told him, "it's impossible. The boy doesn't exist in any official records. No school, no social services, no address. He's a ghost." Alistair, however, refused to surrender. "Ghosts leave traces," he whispered, more to himself than to the investigator. That night, unable to sleep, he replayed the rescue in his mind for the 1,000th time, desperate for a detail he might have missed. He remembered the smoke, the heat, the fear, and then something else, a smell. Underneath the acrid scent of smoke, he remembered a faint, distinctive smell on the boy's clothes. It wasn't dirt or grime. It was paper, the dry, sweet, dusty smell of old books. It was a flimsy clue, a desperate grasp at a memory, but it was all he had. The next day, he gave his team a new, absurd-sounding order. "Forget databases and cameras. I want a list of every public library, every used bookstore, and every community center with a reading program within a 2-mile radius of my building." His team thought he was losing his mind, but they complied. For a week, Alistair visited these places himself. He walked into bustling libraries and cramped, dusty bookshops, places he hadn't set foot in since he was a child. He felt out of place in his expensive suits, a shark in a goldfish pond. He spoke to librarians and clerks, showing them a crude sketch he had commissioned. Most just shook their heads. He was about to give up when he walked into the last place on the list, a small, underfunded community library in a neighborhood he used to avoid. The air inside was thick with that familiar, comforting smell of old paper. He showed the sketch to the librarian at the front desk, a woman with kind, tired eyes named Ms. Carroll. She looked at the drawing, and for the first time, there was a flicker of recognition. "That looks a little like Leo," she said softly. "He's in here almost every day after school. Quiet boy, reads everything he can get his hands on. Says books let him travel." Alistair's heart stopped. "Leo?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Is he here now?" Miss Carroll nodded, pointing towards a small, sunlit corner in the back. "He's right over there." After a search that spanned the entire city and cost a fortune, the clue that mattered wasn't on a screen or a database, but in the faint memory of a forgotten scent. Alistair's legs felt weak as he walked towards the back of the library. His heart was a drum against his ribs, and there he was, sitting at a small wooden table, completely absorbed in a book, was the boy. His face was clean now, but it was unmistakably him. The same calm, serious expression, the same old eyes. Leo. Alistair stood there for a long moment just watching him. The boy who had saved his life wasn't a mythical hero. He was just a kid, reading a book in a quiet corner of the world. All the speeches Alistair had prepared, all the grand gestures, they all felt ridiculous now. He slowly approached the table and sat down in the chair opposite the boy. Leo looked up, startled, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized the man from the fire. He didn't look scared, just surprised. He closed his book, his finger holding his place. "Hello," Alistair said, his voice soft, stripped of all its former power. "I've been looking for you." Leo simply nodded, waiting. "My name is Alistair," he continued. "I never got to thank you." "You're welcome," Leo said quietly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. An awkward silence hung between them. Alistair had to ask. It was the question that had consumed him for months. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "The fire, you came back for me and then you left. There's $1 million reward for you. Why didn't you say anything?" Leo looked down at his book, then back up at Alistair. His answer was so simple, so direct, that it struck the billionaire with the force of a physical blow. "My mom," Leo began, his voice soft. "Before she passed away, she told me that you should always do the right thing, especially when it's hard. She said your character is what you do when no one is watching." He paused, then added, "I wasn't doing it for a reward. I saw someone who needed help. So I helped, that's all. That's all." 3 simple words that completely dismantled Alistair Finch's entire cynical worldview. There was no complex motive, no hidden angle. There was only pure, unadulterated human decency. Alistair felt tears welling in his eyes for the first time since he was a child. This boy, with nothing to his name, possessed a richness of character that Alistair, with all his billions, could only dream of. The search was over. Alistair had found his savior, and in a quiet library, a 12-year-old boy gave him a lesson worth far more than $1 million. Alistair Finch didn't write a check. For the first time, he understood that money would be an insult. It would turn the purest act he had ever witnessed into a simple transaction, and it deserved to be so much more. Instead, he did something else. He started by setting up a trust, not just for Leo's education, but to ensure he would never have to worry about a roof over his head or a meal on his table again. He didn't just give him money, he gave him security, a future. He then worked with the city to have Leo officially fostered under the care of Ms. Carroll, the librarian, whom Leo adored, ensuring he could stay in a stable, loving environment. But that was only the beginning. The real change was in Alistair himself. The fire had burned down his penthouse, but it had also burned down the walls around his heart. Meeting Leo had rebuilt him into something new. He sold his shares in companies with questionable ethics. He shut down the parts of his empire that profited from others' misfortune, and with that capital, he started the Leo Foundation, a massive charitable organization dedicated to funding under-resourced schools, libraries, and youth centers across the city. His new obsession wasn't acquiring wealth, but redistributing it. He didn't live in a penthouse anymore. He bought a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. He learned the names of his neighbors. He volunteered at the library where he first found Leo, reading to children. He and Leo would meet every weekend. They wouldn't talk about the fire. They would talk about books, about school, about dreams. Alistair became the father figure Leo never had, and Leo became the moral compass Alistair never knew he needed. Alistair Finch was still one of the richest men in the city, but his wealth was no longer measured in dollars. It was measured in the number of lives he touched, the futures he helped build, the quiet gratitude in a child's eyes. He had been saved from a fire, but the real rescue was from the prison of his own wealth. The boy who walked away from $1 million had given him something priceless in return, a reason to live, not just for himself, but for everyone else. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons every week.